everybody, and welcome to the Wonders of Weddings webinar series. My name is Angela Headley, and I'm going to be your host for the 20 Things Wedding Planners Will Never Tell You. Before we get started, though, I would like to give you all just a minute or two to adjust your volume. Make sure you can hear me clearly. Also, you may want some way to take some notes and get comfortable. We're going to be here for about 45 minutes to an hour. Also, before we get started, I would like to just quickly mention our disclaimer. This webinar is not intended to discredit wedding planners in any way. Some are really good at what they do and can be a tremendous asset to you and your wedding planning process. The goal of this webinar is to clear up some of the misconceptions brides sometimes get about wedding planners so that ultimately you can make an informed decision as to whether or not hiring one is right for you. Now, this webinar is just jam-packed full of information, so I don't want to take too much time up right now. So if you don't mind, let's just get started. The overview for this section, we are going to look into the limited benefit that wedding planners offer. We're also going to cover credibility to eliminate the room for false promises. We're going to cover control and the amount of control that wedding planners have on your wedding. We're also going to talk about time versus vision and how their time and your vision can make and break the outcome of your wedding. We also are going to cover budget versus value and how sometimes what things cost is not always a true reflection of their value. We're going to quickly go over crisis control, and then we're going to finish with the secret to your wedding planning success. So let's now talk about limited benefit. Having a wedding planner may not help you as much as you think, and most brides sometimes think that wedding planners have a magic wand and they can just come in and make everything better and perfect and everything, and that is not the case. There are actually 3 things that will determine the outcome of your wedding, and most of you have heard me say this before. First, we're going to talk about money. The bride and groom ultimately control the budget. Wedding planners really don't have a whole lot of say over that. Also, the bride and groom will pick their wedding date usually before they start looking for a wedding planner, so a wedding planner can't affect that. The only thing that really a wedding planner has any control over is the quality of goods or services at the wedding. And they can kind of control where your money goes and how much time is spent on each thing, but ultimately they can only control the quality for that time or for that amount of money. This is a big issue for me. People say that wedding planners are an expert in planning weddings, and while this is true for a lot of wedding planners, some of them are, shall we say, they are suffering from the curse of knowledge. They're experienced with what they're familiar with or with what they know, and that experience or fitting inside their comfort zone can jeopardize the outcome of your wedding if it doesn't really fit into that mold. So the first thing that's going to affect that is that they're going to help you save time, not money. That is their number one goal. So I encourage you to think about these things before you hire a wedding planner, because this is what they're good at. This is what people hire them for, but it can change the outcome. Store-bought items will ultimately save you time. Having something that's done is going to be easy to get to. Wham bam, thank you ma'am, cross it off your list and move on to the next thing. Also, wedding planners will encourage you to use vendors that they're familiar with. They do a lot of networking, they do a lot of kickbacks and working together. So the good thing is it's going to help you save time because you're going to know a perceived outcome from a certain vendor, but it may not ultimately save you money. They're also going to steer you more towards all-inclusive vendors or vendors that can do more than just one thing for you, so that ultimately they can just make one phone call and have multiple things done. And they're very familiar with wedding stuff, and so they're going to encourage you to do a lot of wedding stuff, and that's going to come into cookie cutter weddings, and we'll cover that a little bit more later. But they're going to try and fit you into the mold of wedding this and wedding that. Things that will save you money are DIY projects. They tend to steer clear of these because they don't have any control over the outcome. And it takes a lot of time, and they assume that the reason you're hiring them is to help save time. Also, the search for value vendors out there and people that actually might be willing to do a better deal or give you better service or product for the amount of money spent that maybe this particular wedding planner isn't familiar with. Also, creating a unique wedding or out of the box thinking might save you a lot of money, but having to come up with all of those ideas and the resources and where to get them and how to do them will take a lot of time. And then personal elements will save you money but may not save you time. I stress this so much, and we will be talking about it again later. Personal elements are what's going to make your wedding unique. It's going to make your wedding special. So I highly, highly encourage you, even if you have a wedding planner, maybe just splurge a little extra time and save a little extra money and do something that means something versus something that's just traditional wedding. Also, most wedding vendors specialize in one or two areas of wedding planning. We have accounting, and that's going to be the budgeting and negotiating. We have counseling, which is going to be your support and motivation. We have crisis control, which is going to be planning ahead or anticipating problems that might come up to ultimately fix them before they ever happen. Decor and design, which is like your decorating and the look and feel of your wedding. Party planning, making sure all of your guests are having a good time and everybody's in the right place at the right time and it's just a smashing event. And time management. The real thing here is to really hone in on the things that are most important to you, because you may find a wedding planner that's really good at the accounting and the budgeting and all that stuff, but really lacks good time management. Or they might be really good at being your buddy and making recommendations and wanting to make your dreams come true in the counseling aspect, but they might not be that good at decor and design. Or even if they can decorate a place to the nines and it's absolutely gorgeous, you still need to make sure that they know how to help your guests have a good time and make sure that your whole wedding ultimately has the overall experience that you're looking for. And most wedding planners don't have a whole lot of real experience. And by this, I mean that experience is what you get when things don't go your way, not when things do go your way. It is really easy to plan a wedding when you have a comfortable budget, you're familiar with your vendors, and it's just, I can do this, get this out, more or less wham bam, thank you ma'am, also here. But it's really hard to do things when they're out of your comfort zone or when you're unfamiliar with them. So, wedding planners tend to steer clear of hard weddings. These weddings ultimately take a whole lot more time for them, and so they're going to avoid them because they're going to have to get familiar with new ideas. They're going to have to learn about new things, and they're not in business to spend their time learning new things. They're in business to make weddings happen. Also, they're going to try to avoid low budget weddings, and I mean really low budget weddings that are out of their comfort zones. And the reason for that is because it ultimately does take more work. They are going to have to constantly be negotiating for you and revising your budget and trying to make things fit in and doing a whole lot more research, which ultimately relates to more work back to them. And then complicated weddings. Most of them really aren't familiar with very complicated weddings. And then reason for that is because the more things you have going on, the higher risk you have that something's going to go wrong. And they really don't like to deal with those kind of liabilities. It can crush their reputation. It can take more time. It's more backup plans, more money. It's just not something that most wedding planners like to do with. So to assess whether or not they have any real experience, I would ask them how many low budget weddings they've done, how many complicated weddings they've done, how many really hard weddings they've done of trying to work with multiple people or multiple VIPs in your wedding party or really things that they're not familiar with. And that's really what's going to help you gauge whether or not they have a lot of real experience or not. Oh, control. Trusting a wedding planner is not always a good idea. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And you really need to know when is the right time to trust them or when is the right time to just step away and say, I got this, I can do it. And really, that's what we're here for, is to give you the tools and information you need so that you can make the accurate judgment as to whether or not they're actually going to benefit you. You are not a wedding planner's highest priority. They are all in business to make money, and you need to remember this. Even when you hire them, even when they say, oh, I love all the ideas you have for your wedding, which we do. It's pretty sincere. But the bottom line is that this is our job, and we need to make money, and so that's what we're here for. And we're going to do that in any way we can. I love this illustration because you think that you're that little red dot and that it's so special and so important to you, when really you're kind of mixed in with everything else that we have going on. A lot of times wedding planners will have other weddings to deal with at the same time as yours. The reason for this is because they need to maximize their time. They need to maximize their income. You're also going to get thrown in the mix with their family life and their kids' school and ballet practice and their family reunion coming up next weekend. So sometimes that may or may not take priority over planning your wedding. Most wedding planners I know also have a social life. They have things to do on Friday night. They have hot dates to go on. They have things to look forward to themselves. So you're going to be mixed in with their social life too. And then most of them are entrepreneurs and are in business for themselves. And in this case, they still have to balance actually doing business with doing business, which is the paperwork behind the day-to-day of running a business, the cleaning the office, the faxing all those important papers, making those important phone calls, paying their bills, all that stuff that goes into that. Not all of them will go above and beyond for you, and this is a very sad but true fact. Most of them know that there are about 6,000 weddings per day in the United States going on that they kind of have their pick of the lot of. If the average wedding planner in the United States makes about $4,000 a wedding, they can really maximize their time to maximize their income. If they have about 6 weddings a year, which is like one every other month, they're making about $24,000. I mean, if their husband's working or whatever, it's a good hobby to have, and this is how some of them can pull it off as a hobby. If they're getting a little more aggressive and doing about one per month, they're at about $50,000 a year, which can be depending on where they live, but the majority of the United States, that's a pretty comfortable income. And then if they can do a wedding every other week, or 2 a month, they're up to big bucks there. So the reality of the situation is that referrals are nice, but they're not necessary. They don't have to do more for you than what you're expecting so that you'll tell your buddy or a friend, because while it's nice to go work with them, they have 6,000 weddings a day and they really only need 1 a month or 2 a month in order to make their numbers. So the amount of weddings for the amount of wedding planners, the wedding planner really does have their pick of the litter. The other thing I'd watch out for is that you're not going to be included in every decision. When you sign that contract, depending on what the contract says, they take control over your money, your assets, and your wedding plans. And in this case, they can override some of the requests that you might have. Say you want mahogany chairs, and they say, well, cherry, similar but not the same, is cheaper and that'll work better for me. Or I know this vendor that provides cherry chairs and not mahogany, so I'm going to go with them because I know them. So they can ultimately override your request if your contract gives them control. They can also filter the options that they're going to give you. They usually say that they're doing this to help you save time because there are unlimited options out there. This is the truth. But they really show what they want you to see. So if they want you to work with a particular vendor or have a particular style of linen for your event, they're going to kind of steer you in that direction by making that look like the ultimate best decision possible, and then kind of pairing it with more of the not so good options to kind of, I don't want to say trick you, but kind of manipulate you into thinking the way that they're thinking. And they can also make bias recommendations. And this is, networking, this is brownie points with vendors. And every wedding planner is guilty of this. Even I'm guilty of this. I say things that I want my brides to do ultimately in their best interest so that I can kind of control the outcome of their wedding. But really, on the back end, it's good for me too, because I don't have to spend a whole lot of time learning something new or finding somebody new or trying to figure out something that I don't already know. And really, the goals come down to they do want to save you time. Obviously, that's why you hired them. You don't have all the time in the world. You trust their judgment. So they are going to be there for you. And that is one of their number one goals. But they also want to save them work. Again, they have to maximize how much money they can make so that their income can go up. And they do this by leveraging the time that they have. And then obviously they need to make some money too. So if they can get kickbacks or referrals for other big budget weddings or be in the loops of certain networking groups so they can get more weddings and work less, that's going to be one of their top priorities as well. And then this is very scary, but it's very true. And it's even more true today with the economy in the state that it's in with hobby wedding planners. They do, or they can, shall I say, have hidden agendas. I don't know how many of you have ever heard WIIFM. It really is what's in it for me. And while you're looking at a wedding planner thinking, what can you do for me? How can you help me make my wedding dreams come true? They're also going to be looking at, well, what's in it for me? How much money can I make off of this? How much time is it going to take me? Am I going to get brownie points with people that I need to make connections with? And really, and I hate to say this, but it can be very, very true. The bigger the payoff that's in it for them, the better they will perform for you. So in a case where you have a very low budget, or you have a lot of intricate details for your wedding, it might be better for you to eliminate the risk and do it yourself. And yeah, it's going to take time, and yeah, it's going to take work, but that's why we give you the tools so you can do that. It's a risk. Again, it's personal decision, personal opinions that you have, but really they are looking to see what's in it for them. So maybe a gift, a tip at the end of the night, something. But when all's said and done, the more important thing is what's in it for them up front, and that you can identify that, and if they're willing to accept that early on. Also, you are expected to trust a stranger. Have you ever considered how well you know a wedding planner? Most girls haven't. Most brides don't. They go meet with a wedding planner. They seem like they're the most wonderful person on the planet, and they assume that they're always going to be that way. But the reality of it is that you have to trust that they know what they're doing. And unless you've seen them in action or seen them work, you don't know. You can see pictures of things they've done, but that's other vendors included, and you don't know how much of that they actually did. So how do you know if they really know what they're doing? You don't. You kind of have to follow your gut, see how you feel about it, and trust them to do that. Also, what happens if you have a difference of opinions? Wedding planners are not your mom, they're not your best friend, they're not your sister. You don't have a history or a track record with them of how do they deal with a crisis situation or when you guys are disagreeing. And really that can determine their behavior in the long run and how they're going to react or interact with you as they're planning the wedding. For example, if they want something one way and you want something the other way, if it says in the contract they can override it, they will probably override it. Or if they sense that you're being difficult and demanding, or you want something that they don't want, they can all of a sudden become difficult to get hold of, stop answering their phones, their emails, just so they can avoid you until it's ultimately too late, and then you're kind of boxed in or forced into a decision per their recommendation. And also, who's going to make all the final decisions? They may say that you will have control over that, but depending on what your contract says or how they act or how things are set up, they may have the ultimate control over the final decisions. And this can be very scary, kind of like walking around blindfolded, maybe even in the dark. So the idea is to kind of clear all of this stuff up with your wedding planner before you sign anything with them, before you commit to them, or before they begin any work on your wedding. Their time versus your vision. I will tell you up front, they value their time more than your wedding. This goes back to the dot thing. You're the little red dot, and you have a lot of things that you're competing with in their life. Ultimately, you're going to have to learn how to balance the time that they're willing to give you and the intricacy of the wedding vision that you have. Now, in order to save them time, they're going to expect you to know what you want. Most of them ask you for what you want. They ask you what colors you want, what flowers you want, and they really do sometimes expect you to know these things. And you can feel like this question mark, like, which way should I go? There are endless options out there for you to choose from. And if you only have 12 months or 18 months or 16 months until your wedding, you kind of have to filter through those options pretty quickly. But having all of those options can really lead to doubt, because you're going to wonder always, is this the right one? Could I have done something better? Are there other options out there that I forgot? So you begin to really question yourself. Questioning yourself really ultimately leads to you being stressed out, and you start getting restless, and you get those sleepless nights, and you start wondering, is this really the best thing? I don't know what's going on. And that really will lead to anxiety. And this is when brides get on that emotional roller coaster, and they're really high highs and really low lows. And really the bottom line is that they just don't know. They're not secure in what they're doing. And if a wedding planner isn't right next to you saying, you made the right decision, good job, or you should do this, for better or for worse, whether it's really what you want or what they want you to want. But when they're there, you kind of have that added, I trust you to do this. But when they're not, to save them time or to save them energy, and they expect you to know, then you have to go through all this on your own to deliver to them what they want and need from you in order to make your wedding happen the way you want it to. Also, wedding planners absolutely love cookie cutter weddings. I love cookie cutter weddings. As a wedding planner, they are quick, they are easy, they require little thought. And the danger of this is that sometimes when we're trying to maximize our time, we forget about how important your wedding is to you, because we're looking at all of the different things we have going on, and being able to squeeze a bride into a cookie cutter wedding isn't always, I'll say it's not right, but it isn't always the best thing either for the bride or for the wedding planner to do. But at the moment, sometimes it can seem like a real easy, good idea. So for an example here, I have a wedding in a nutshell here, a bride and a groom, some rings, a bouquet, some flowers, and some stationery, obviously. And then as a wedding planner, I will come in and say, oh, well, you're getting married. Okay, well, let's fit you into this mold. And so we have a tuxedo, which is very normal. It seems to be an almost every wedding thing. There are some weddings out there that do things a little bit differently, but for the most part, they have something similar to a tuxedo. It's things like, I want a tailcoat, or I want Irish kilts, or I want to buy a suit. I don't want to rent a tuxedo, or I want to wear slacks or something else. That's not really part of that. That kind of can throw us off, and we might try and persuade you to go with the more norm. Obviously, a wedding dress is going to be very normal, very natural. We expect you all to be very different in your selections, but the bottom line is that we do expect you to have a dress. So if you were trying to get something like pants or something a little bit different, that may not fit, and we may persuade you to do one of the more norm things, which is get a dress. A wedding bouquet, very, very traditional. I have run into some brides, though, that say, I don't want a bouquet, or I want something different besides a traditional bouquet. And when that comes up, it's like, uh-oh, what do I do? Do I try and persuade them against it and kind of fit them into a cookie cutter so we can get on with other things? Or do I acknowledge what they're saying and try and make what they want happen? In this case, we have some gold bands here, very, very traditional in jewelry section. I can budget for that and everything. But say my bride pops on me that they're family heirlooms, and so they need to be handled a little bit differently, or they're not going to be worked into the budget, but they do need to be sized and cleaned by an appropriate dealer and or jeweler for that matter. And maybe I'm not familiar with somebody who outsources stuff that's family heirlooms. I'm only familiar with vendors who do nude jewelry, so that might throw me for a loop if I wasn't expecting it. Roses, one of the most traditional wedding flowers. We are all good with that if you tell me roses, but if you come to me and say, hey, I want bluebells or I want daisies, I might try and fit you into something that's a little more wedding-y that I'm familiar with. But hopefully in most cases your wedding planner will honor your wishes. And then here the stationery is completely out of the cookie cutter, and that's because it's homemade. So I'm not familiar with it. I have no control over it. I don't even know what to do with it. So it really doesn't fit. So in this case, as wedding planner, I'm forced to say, do I try and squeeze it in and encourage you to go with something store-bought, or do I honor what you want, even though it doesn't fit into my cookie cutter? It's a constant balance that you, your wedding planner, have to kind of come to terms with and work through so that ultimately you can have your total wedding vision at the end without the cookie cutter. The reason that we advised against homemade and custom work is because it takes time, and we really don't have any control over it for how much it's going to cost. If you're going to craft stores or anything, we don't know that. We're not familiar with that. We don't do that on a regular basis. So we may always try and steer you around it or steer clear of it. Remember this though, whenever you run into this situation, and ultimately it's your decision, money can't buy personal stuff, but it can buy personality. So it might not be able to buy, your homemade pictures for your table place cards, or your aunt's calligraphy or something, but it can buy, something fun, some funny handwriting, a funky font on the computer or something. But ultimately, it's not going to be totally personal to you. It can't buy meaningful, but it can buy traditional. So it may not be, place cards that have your pets' names on them, or the best places that you've gone with your fiance before you got married, but it can buy 1, 2, or 3 table card numbers, and they might be very pretty. So again, you have to balance that and choose. Money can't buy special or sentimental things, and ultimately this is the stuff that's going to make your wedding feel like your wedding. All of your guests have been to a wedding before. They're probably going to go to another one again, but these are the things that are going to stand out and say, remember when she did that? That was totally all about her and her fiance, or that was so romantic, or it's those memorable moments that's going to stick with them and you forever. Money things will come and go. Store-bought stuff come and go. Themes change, time changes, trend changes, stuff. So all of that stuff can just really be just kind of a flight and be gone the next day and forgotten about. Also, money can't buy love, and really your whole wedding needs to be about your love for you and your fiance that you guys share. But it can buy pretty things. So if you're more of the traditional pretty that works, that's fine. But if you really want to showcase your love, just remember that no amount of money is going to be able to do that. You're going to have to do the time, you're going to have to do the work to actually make it special. The money that you have versus the true value of things in your budget. Wedding planners are usually always more concerned with your budget and keeping you on budget and not letting you go over budget, because that's one of the things that they are hired for, and less on focus on delivering true value. And this can make or break the outcome of your wedding more than you might think. Really what they try to do is use their own resources. And the reason for this is because they're familiar. Now, this can be good or bad. It can be good because they can kind of gauge the quality that you're going to be able to get for it. But the bad thing is that it may not necessarily work best for you and your vision of your wedding. So you need to always ask yourself when you run into a difference of opinion here, or when they're kind of trying to do something, just subtly ask yourself, can you really afford it? And by this I mean, not does it just fit in your budget, but how does the cost versus the benefit fit with everything else? For example, they may have their standard industry standard budget allocation chart. Every wedding planner does. It's how they decide how much of your money goes to each thing and then try and make you stick within that. And our budget webinar and the budget how-to guide go over all of this, so you at least have a starting point. But if they only use that and say you have $1,000 to spend on stationery, you have $3,000 to spend on a dress, and that's that, and that's it, is that really the best value? If maybe your highest priority is your wedding dress or your bridal attire, and you can maybe splurge a little bit on some shoes or on a better veil, if you can maybe cut some expense from your stationery that most people are just going to throw away. You might need a couple keepsakes for mom and grandma, but in all reality, it's not something that anybody really holds on to. So that's where it comes into, can you really afford it, and at what expense? And then the cost versus benefit of whatever it is. Do you have to compromise your priorities? If your priority is your wedding attire and your wedding planner is trying to get you to spend your full $1,000 on your stationery, and there's really no good reason to do that, then are you compromising what's your highest priority to kind of buy something that, if you did a little bit more research, maybe you could only spend $500 on, and then you could ultimately put the additional $500 towards your dress budget? So always be balancing, not just does it fit in the budget, but really what is the value there. And I really encourage you, just be careful, just be aware, because if you're not, you're just flushing your money down the toilet. In some cases, it doesn't need to be spent on certain things, especially things that don't mean anything to you. If stationery is one of the things that's highest on your priority list, then maybe you should spend the money on it and not on something else. Or maybe it's fine to do that. But if it's not, just be aware, question yourself, know what's going on, so that you're not wasting your precious resources. Also, wedding planners decide when they'll work on your wedding, and this can cause them to miss deals or promotions that vendors or retailers are offering, so that you can miss out on great deals or things that might ultimately save you money, so you can pull it and put it somewhere else. Because I'm pretty sure that most of you are going to be thinking about your wedding all day, every day. So if you see a sale going on at your local retailer and you say, oh, if I buy these favors, it's going to save me $300 from the ones in the magazine, then maybe that's a good thing to jump on. But chances are they're not thinking about that, because they have their life, their agenda. Your wedding is a job to them, so they're not always focused on how can I save them money, how can I get them the best value. They're focused on other things like laundry or getting the kids picked up from school or their vacation that they have coming up. So they may miss those things that could save you money and not really get you the most value for what you have to spend. Also, networking to them is more important than price, because price up front is going to be a big thing. So they will try and fit it in your budget. But networking is what's going to get them all of those other weddings that they need to be able to make a comfortable income in the future. Because remember, you're a one-time deal. Your wedding will come and it will go, but they're a wedding planner. They have lots of weddings to do all the time. So they need to hook up with vendors who can help that. So remember, they're focused on their pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is whatever number that they have to get to every year, and they need to maximize their time to be able to do that. So really, if they can kind of squeeze it into your wedding, if they can kind of make things work or fit it in, then they're definitely going to try to do that. They may use manipulation, they may use suggestions, they may use recommendations, but however they do it, just remember the what's in it for me thing, and that they're focusing on their future relationships, their future weddings, their future networking is based on sometimes what they do for you. Also beware, wedding vendors choose how and when they're going to spend your budget. And again, this may not always get you the best bang for your buck. They're going to do this by recommending things. And remember, they also have control over your overall vision. So if they say that certain things need to be bought or certain things need to be paid for now, or you should do this or that, instead of waiting and maybe if it doesn't work out, replace it with something else, because they have all of that control, they're going to be able to say, do it now. I don't want to risk something else coming up later. Or they might even put it off, so you might miss out on something that might be a really good deal, such as a vendor offering 50% off now, and they might say, well, we'll wait and see on that one, because if it doesn't work out, I have another florist. So in the end, even if you still have to go with the same florist, you still missed out on their 50% off sale, which you could definitely take that money and you could run with it instead of them. And then the way that they do that is their timelines that they make of when payments are due and when they're buying things and when they're committing to things, because not all of them are going to commit to your florist in the 6th month of wedding planning, and not all of them are going to book your officiant 11 months out. So their timelines are going to dictate that. And if it says this needs to be paid for and purchased by this date, and if you waited another month, you could have had a better deal. Or if you did it the month prior to that deadline, which they weren't aware of because they didn't see it in their calendar, you could miss out on a good deal that way too. And then definitely adhering to vendor requirements. And if that's the bare minimum they do, that can cost you an arm and a leg. Most vendors require a deposit being paid at a certain point in time, usually when you book them. And then the remainder of the payment is due about 2 weeks before your wedding. If they do this and they decide to book a vendor on their schedule, or if they decide to pay the vendor 2 weeks before, sometimes you can get really good deals when you say, if we pay everything up front or right now, can you take 20% off or something? So if they really just stick with that, it could cost you 20% times 10 things. I mean, depending on how much that is, if that's $200, you're saving $2,000 on 10 things. So just again, they can miss out on values based on how and when they plan to spend your money. Crisis control. Wedding planners are better at this than brides are. I will tell you that up front, because they know how to anticipate problems. They have lived through potential problems, so they can go around like the movie The Wedding Planner and have their little bag of, I know that somebody somewhere is going to need this, so I'm going to have it with me. But the bottom line is that they are rarely prepared for the worst. And the reason for that is because it takes a lot more planning and a lot more time to make arrangements to plan around some catastrophic thing that may or may not break the outcome of your wedding. So most of them try to not think about it or avoid the subject totally in general. And part of this is last minute changes. They kind of pawn them off on you. If it's not in the contract up front, not agreed to up front, all of a sudden it becomes your responsibility. You have to figure out how to make it happen. It's money out of your pocket, and you have to spend the time that you were trying to save originally, now trying to fix the problem. A great example of this is a couple of years ago, there was a wedding that I was familiar with, and the bride was actually going to her wedding location a week before her wedding to kind of unwind with her bridesmaids. And one of her bridesmaids happened to check the weather on her smartphone and said, "Oh my goodness, it's going to rain on your wedding day." And her wedding was supposed to be outside in the gardens, and it was supposed to be beautiful. But the bottom line was now they were facing rain. And she called her wedding planner and said, "What do we do? Do you have a tent? Can we move it inside?" And they ultimately were not able to move it inside because the space was already being pre-decorated for the reception, and there was no other space inside. But the wedding planner didn't plan ahead so much to get her a tent, because she said that you didn't want one. It was supposed to be nice. It's the middle of summer. It's not supposed to rain. And the decision came down to, well, do you have the additional money for the tent? And in this case, I think it was around $10,000-$20,000 to bring in a tent in a week and have it set up. And luckily for this bride, she had the money. She didn't want to, but she did. And if it hadn't been for her bridesmaid checking the weather, her wedding planner wasn't on top of it. So in this case, she got lucky. But in your case, if you have to make last minute changes or things, it's on you. It's on your budget. It's on your time. You have to figure out what you need. And they're going to say, well, I honored the contract. I did everything in it. And you're still going to have to pay them regardless. So big thing to watch out for. Consider it when you're planning your wedding. I'm not trying to scare you or anything. But with all of our tools and resources, our goal is to ultimately take a lot of that stress off of you and to teach you what to anticipate or what to look out for and how to make the arrangements to accommodate those changes. Also, wedding planners will pass on liabilities to you. You ever heard the phrase that mud flows downhill? In this case, it goes uphill. So you have a bunch of guests at your wedding, and if something were to happen to them or any one of them, they are going to turn towards the vendor who possibly caused it. If it was somebody slipping on some water that was not wiped up, or if there was broken glass or something, they're going to point their fingers at the vendors because ultimately it was you didn't wipe it up, or you served this, or you broke it. The vendors, in turn, are going to turn to the wedding planner and say, well, you hired me to do this. You planned on all these guests being here. You fix it. You're in charge. And then the wedding planner could very easily turn around and say, well, none of this would have happened if you two weren't getting married. If you didn't have a wedding, then your vendors wouldn't be here, your guests wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have problems. So in this case, it's more in your interest to protect yourselves, and in the budget section at the end of that, we have some insurance providers that I would love to share with you that will help you deal with this, so that in the event that something does go wrong, it can be fixed and you can be protected without anybody really having to suffer too much, either financially or for their relationships or their reputation. And then the expense in making those arrangements for big backup plans can sometimes override the maximum stretch that they're trying to get you out of your budget. So again, if you are trying to get married outside or something, and weather may or may not be an issue, you might be the one that has to be liable for making the appropriate backup plans in case of weather. And some venues, they say, well, you can move everything inside, which is a nice feature, or I highly recommend always having another location, maybe on call, and including a rain card in your stationery so that your guests know if something were to happen. But usually this turns back on you because it costs them more time, it costs more money, and they're trying to maximize your budget to the extent that they can, and they don't want to spend the additional time to consider all of the nasty things either. Also, no-show vendors are a big thing. I've been at weddings where vendors don't show up and wedding planners don't have a backup plan. Again, we highly encourage you to make these backup plans. In the budget section, we do cover which ones you should have in place and how you can make them without getting too much into debt, without having to budget too much money for it, or without having to go too overboard in making excessive additional plans. Also, cancellations. If a vendor goes out of business like 2 months before your wedding, I've seen that happen. And if you don't have a contract that says if they go out of business, they have to find somebody else, then you're stuck finding somebody else. Sometimes, in most cases, they'll give you your money back, but now you still need to find a replacement. And it's close to your wedding. So again, it takes time. So most wedding planners aren't prepared for that, while some of them will be willing to help you out with it. Sudden illness, a big one. I had a groom one time who got very sick and was rushed to the emergency room a couple days before his wedding, and it turned out he had to have his appendix out. and that was going to take a day, and then he was going to be hospitalized for about a week, and then it was going to be another week to 2 weeks for recovery time, and his wedding was supposed to be during that time. So in that case, everything had to be rescheduled, redrawn out. We had to work around different vendor schedules. Some of them were booked, so we had to find replacements. I mean, it was just a mess, but you can imagine why wedding planners won't always plan for that, because of the time and energy that it takes to make those adjustments. And then emergency situations, and this is where I highly recommend insurance for, such as your officiant getting hit in a car accident on his way to your wedding. And that's kind of an emergency situation that nobody had any control over. Also, I've seen this with military, with grooms getting called to active duty, and then it's like, well, what do? We can't arrange our life, so we have to arrange our wedding around our life. So again, it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to do that. So most wedding planners won't take the extra step and the initiative to do this. Now, you can negotiate it in your contract up front. You can talk to them, kind of gauge where they're at and how they're doing it, how you feel about them, how willing they are to take care of you, to assess whether or not they're going to be willing to do some of these things. But in all reality, most of the time, the backup plans are going to be your responsibility. So now the secret to your wedding planning success, and you've heard me mention it a couple times in here, is that you now have access to everything wedding planners know. And in a lot of cases, you have access to a lot more than what wedding planners know. Right now, now that Wonders of Weddings has actually gone.com. So we encourage you to use all of our tools and our resources to get access to this information. And the purpose of this is to ultimately give you control. We want to be able to help you make informed decisions. We want to be able to help you be able to plan your wedding with confidence. We don't want you to have to worry about any of the things in here, to doubt yourself, second guess yourself, wonder if you're getting true value for what you're spending, wonder if somebody has your best interest in mind or not. Because really, when it all comes down to it, your wedding is most important to you. So you should be the one planning it. It's your dream, it's your vision, so why not you take charge? We'll give you the tools and information how to do that, and you'll have 10 times more the effect than hiring somebody that may or may not be willing to invest their life into your dreams. So I encourage you to go to wondersofweddings.com. There we have our free webinar series, which you are listening to right now. I also know that our calendar, which is called Perfect Timing and the How-To Guide, is on sale for $1. I highly recommend this so that you can maximize your time when planning your wedding. Also, we have our how-to guides on there that are going to walk you through everything you need. I mean, there are worksheets, there are charts, there's how much money do I need to set aside for this, or what am I forgetting in these expenses, down to how far is that linen going to drop on this size table, and what if I want to dress it up, and do I use an overlay, and if so, what size, and what colors should I use, and how do I pick my flowers, and how do I enter my ceremony, how do I make timelines. You have it all in those how-to guides. Also our checklist, so that when you're stressed out, not thinking clearly, you can always make sure that you have everything you need, from your pre-wedding shopping to your wedding day and wedding night, also for your groom, so he doesn't have to worry about anything. All your beauty stuff, everything's on there for your checklist. And then, of course, our vendor questions, the top 20 questions you need to be asking all of your vendors. This will ultimately give you control, and oftentimes more control than wedding planners have over vendors, because frankly, most wedding planners do business with vendors as relationships and not necessarily for what they're capable of or how they actually work. So by asking these questions, you'll be able to gauge if every vendor is actually right for you and going to be the best value for your money and give you what you want and accommodate every need that you have. And with them, you can really be on top of the world with them. Also, sign up for our free tip of the day. It's on our homepage at wondersofweddings.com. And then every day, Monday through Friday, you will get our free tip of the day. And there are tons of them. So you won't be getting repeats. You'll just be getting new ideas and inspiration and thoughts to help you out as you go about planning your wedding. So Just to sum up the companion materials that we covered in this webinar, if you guys care to get into any of those, we did the how-to guides, planners and coordinators, the budget one, the priorities definitely will help you learn how to make your priorities to see cost versus benefit of a wedding planner, how they can work with you depending on what those are, crisis control, how to help avoid problem situations, insurance also, I mentioned it, we cover it in the budget wedding webinar, but there is an insurance how-to guide on the website. And then the 20 questions, one of the big ones I would recommend is for the planners and coordinators, because that's what we covered here. So ask all of them those 20 questions, and then you'll be able to really assess how much of a benefit they can be to you in your wedding. So with that said, that is your 20 Things Wedding Planners Will Never Tell You webinar. I hope you all have a most wonderful time planning your wedding. I look forward to speaking with you. Love to hear your input, for better, for worse, likes and dislikes. If you go onto wondersofweddings.com and go to the contact page, I read all of the messages that are sent there. So please, please, please send whatever you have, because we want to make sure that we are always giving you guys the absolute best resources that we can offer brides around the country. So happy wedding planning, you all. Look forward to seeing you again at another webinar. Until then, take care.